Okay, well, we're going to start with our song. I didn't do the song on Sunday because the slides weren't working, but now the slides are working. So we can practice our song. Ephesus had the wrong emphasis. Smyrna was about to be burned. Pergamum needed to purge their Balaam. Thyatira tolerated a tyrant. Sardis' reputation was tarnished. Philadelphia, they were pillaged definitely. Laodicea, it's the lukewarm city. It's the 7 churches of Asia. Very good, very good. Anyone finding that song to be a little helpful as you are thinking and working on this book at all? Names? No one? You'll admit it later. You'll admit it later. What's that? That's true. We'll be hitting on it. Okay. I kind of showed this slide from a distance on Sunday, but these are the 7. Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea. Of course, even the way that I've organized it on here kind of shows the outline that I'm suggesting. But what was the pattern that we saw here with the 7? Yes, yeah, chiasm. You could also call it an inverse parallelism, which means that the outside ones go together. The Ephesus and Laodicea are about to be removed unless they repent. And then like an onion peel, like an onion layer, or like the colors, on a rainbow. Then the next ones, those go together, Smyrna and Philadelphia. Those are the 2 that nothing bad is said about them. And then the 3 in the middle are the compromised churches, that there's good and bad going on, kind of a mixed congregation there. Okay, so we talked about this, and I'm going to review this for a moment just because of I just think it's crucial. It's very, very important for us to see this. So what are the sources of the church's current difficulties? Remember the 4 answers that we talked about? What were some of the sources of the church's difficulties? False doctrine and false teachers. Good. Persecution. From what kinds of people? From what people? Jewish people currently. Both Smyrna and Philadelphia mention the Jewish element to locals. What else is going to be a factor for them? Roman persecution. And, they're, because Philadelphia had been doing so well in their difficulty, it said that they're about to be spared. The tribulation is going to be coming upon the whole earth. Okay, good. We've got 3 of the... Do we have 3 of the 4? I think so. Oh, what's the last one? Yeah, culture, and by that, I would lump that in with well, no, that is a separate idea, I suppose. The idea of the pagan culture around them, the influence of the pagan people around them, that's going to be very connected to persecution, because just like in our day and their day, you kind of don't go along with the system, you go against the tide of the current, you're going to start getting people pretty angry at you. And so they were different than their society and different than the paganism, but that then becomes hand in hand with persecution. And the final one was Satan. That's right. He's the source of it all. That's right. So false teaching, we got the Nicolaitans, Balaam and Jezebel. I think we'll come across those things later on in the book. Absolutely. Greco-Roman culture, idol temples, to many gods, to emperor worship, being thrown in prison. I think we'll see things like that around them. Absolutely. We highlighted this, Jewish persecution and influence, and just the fact that the Jews were stirring up lots of Roman persecution against the Christians. I think we might come across that later. And, I think we miss this a lot as we study, that there's a lot in Revelation countering the Judaizing teaching and the conversations against the Judaizers. And one thing a Bible teacher, one of my previous teachers mentioned that just kind of clued me into this way of thinking. A lot of the arguments in 2 Corinthians, Romans, don't seem as relevant because our next door neighbors are not unbelieving Jews. Now, there are some Jews in Columbus, unbelieving Jews, who don't believe that Jesus is the Messiah, but they're not like they make up the whole of the community. I don't know if any of them are even on your block. And so, if our next door neighbors and the people we're talking with every day were unbelieving Jews, those arguments would feel very relevant. You go back to those chapters in Romans and be like, oh, I need this. What did he say here? How did he counter that? Same thing with 2 Corinthians, same thing with Galatians, same thing with Philippians. So we miss that. We're more used to thinking in terms of the worldliness and the paganism around us and being different from the world, that kind of thing. So the Judaizing teaching, the Judaizing element there was very real for them, clearly, because the Jews in their community were stirring up trouble against them. And finally, ultimately, as Darren was highlighting, ultimately the persecution comes from Satan, a name coming up, showing up 4 different times in this section. Think we'll come across Satan later on in the book? Absolutely. Okay, so the point of all that is that serves as a very good introduction to the book. The whole book of Revelation, in a simple sense, is introduced here. We're going to see a lot in this book teaching against false doctrines. Their calls to be pure and faithful. Encouragement for the Christians when facing persecution from the Romans, or even from the Jews. Teaching that counters Judaizing influence from their Jewish neighbors, and then teaching about Satan and his role in the behind-the-scenes picture of what's going on in the spiritual realm. So I really wanted to hit that again, because I think that's really important for the book. Okay, so this is kind of where we ended on Sunday. So far, what would we say the tone of Revelation has been? Like bright and uplifting it, or kind of down and dark and ominous?
Darker but edifying.
Sure, yeah, absolutely edifying. And so, a lot of this is that tribulation is promised to be coming their way. I just mentioned this verse a minute ago. This is Philadelphia. I will keep from you the hour of trial that is coming on the whole world to try those who dwell on the earth. 2 different words for world and earth used there for really, I think, the whole kind of Roman world there. So the point is that there's some dark things coming. This book is to prepare them for that. But now we're going to then get this heavenly perspective on things. So John is going to get to see the spiritual realities. The curtains are pulled back, and we get to see what's going on in heaven. And then this, of course, is going to end up being this very encouraging message for the Christians. Heaven is so crucial here. Heaven is where all these events are coming from by God's allowance. We're going to see that. These things aren't happening because the world's out of control. These things aren't happening because God's not powerful enough. These things come from God. All these events are allowed by Him. That's where their hope lies, in heaven, in God's help. And that's where they're headed, to God's presence. So here we see the throne, but by the end of the book, the Christians are going to be there with God before the throne, serving before the throne. God is wiping away every tear from their eyes. So heaven is kind of the crux of the whole thing. So that's where we get to go in chapter 4 here. So can someone read, please, all of chapter 4, all the verses there, nice and loud.
After this I looked, and there in heaven was an open door. The first voice that I had heard speaking to me like a trumpet said, "Come up here, and I will show you what must take place after this." Immediately I was in the Spirit, and a throne was set there in heaven. One was sealed on the throne, and the one seated looked like jasper and cornelian stone. A rainbow that looked like an emerald surrounded the throne. Around that throne were 24 thrones, and on the thrones sat 24 elders dressed in white clothes, with gold crowns on their heads. Flashes of lightning and rumblings of thunder came from the throne. 7 fiery torches were burning before the throne, which are the 7 spirits of God. Something like a sea of glass, similar to crystal, was also before the throne. 4 living creatures covered with eyes in front and in back were in the middle and around the throne. The first living creature was like a lion. The second living creature was like a calf. The third living creature had a face like a man, and the fourth living creature was like a flying eagle. Each of the 4 living creatures had 6 wings. They were covered with eyes around and inside. Day and night they never stopped, saying, "Holy, holy, holy, Lord God the Almighty, who was, who is, and who is coming." Whenever the living creatures give glory, honor, and thanks to the one seated on the throne, the one who lives forever and ever, the 24 elders fall down before the one seated on the throne, worship the one who lives forever and ever, cast their crowns before the throne, and say, "Our Lord and God, you are worthy to receive glory and your will. They exist and were created.
Okay, so here we come now to the throne room of heaven. Not just any part of heaven, we're in the presence here of God, described here as the one seated on the throne. Okay, so what's the first thing that John sees in verse 2? Yes, good. I'll take that. Okay, so after the open door, then when he gets to heaven, what's the first thing he sees? A throne. I think I heard someone say that. And the description of the one on the throne, would you say that there's a lot of description of God, or would you say there's fairly minimal description of God? I'd say pretty minimal, right? It does not go on and on. So there's the throne, and there's one seated on the throne. He has the appearance of jasper and carnelian, and around the throne there's this glow, like this rainbowy emerald glow. That's it. I mean, the only description we really get of him is the appearance of jasper and carnelian. And so I would say very restrained description of God. The Old Testament, when it describes God, does not go on and on either, but I think you get a little more detail in Daniel 7 or Ezekiel 1 than you even do here. So this is God himself. If there's anything that it seems similar to, it's the description of God in Ezekiel 1. This gleaming, kind of this glow over this rainbow of brightness around the throne, and comparing it to gemstones. And like we just said, very little is really said about God here. So it says, describes him as having the appearance of jasper and carnelian. Your translation may say sardius. Sometimes we can't know exactly what very specific things are from the ancient world, because it may give this whole list, like the gemstones in the priest's golden breastplate, the priest's golden ephod, and it lists 12 stones. And unless there's some ancient Hebrew book out there that says, this stone, weighs this much and tends to look like these colors and whatever, unless it gives us that level of scientific description, sometimes we have a hard time knowing exactly what it is. But thankfully, it doesn't really matter all that much. But if these are the stones, you got jasper here. That was the prettiest picture of jasper that I was able to quickly find. Particularly relevant is this is one of the 12 stones in the high priest's golden breastplate, the golden ephod that we just mentioned. And that symbolized the 12 tribes of Israel. Jasper will show up again. So, and you can think about that. As we talk about the jasper here, hymns that mention the jasper walls or jasper may start floating into your head. Like, welcome to the last week of my life as we're working on this class. And then carnelian, sardis, is also one of the 12 stones on the high priest's golden breastplate, and carnelian will show up again. So you can kind of be looking for that a little bit. Carnelian tends to be red. Think carne, like meat, like blood, like looking like blood, or that. So that red color is part of the carnelian even description there. Okay, any other thoughts on the description of God so far? Comments or questions with that? So then, what is it that surrounds the throne of God in verse 4? 24 more thrones, yes. So around the throne were 24 thrones, and who is sitting in these 24 thrones? 24 elders. How are they described? Okay, white garments and golden crowns are on their head. So 24 elders are seated on these 24 thrones, and they got the white garments. That's going to typically be a picture in the book of Revelation and connections to the Old Testament, but holiness and purity, like a bride, that kind of picture of the purity of a virgin bride, with golden crowns on their head. So what do crowns usually connect to? kingship. It can be like victory, but it's certainly an elevated thing, right? Like the poorest of the poor don't walk around with crowns. It's the kings, the captains, the victors, the emperors that walk around with crowns. So crowns is probably a helpful thought here. Okay, they're called the elders. The elders. What's the Bible background for elders? Do we see the word elder elsewhere in the Bible? Is that a Bible word we use? Okay, shepherds of the flock. And Ryan, what do you mean by that? Old or New Testament?
New Testament primarily, the description of heritage.
Okay, you said a flock, and that's the church, a local church. Very good, okay. Yes, Mike.
They were called the 70 elders of Israel, the elders back in the Old Testament.
Okay, yes, and we're going to go there in just a minute, actually. The 70 elders particularly, I think, are relevant for here. The 70 elders in the time of Moses were like the main leaders of the tribes, but the elders picture continues in the Old Testament. So elders in Old and New Testament, they're rulers. They're heads over people. So in Genesis 50, you got the elders of the nation of Egypt. Numbers 22, you have the elders of the nation of Israel. There were elders over cities, elders over tribes, elders over the nation. So think rulers, think heads, think people with power and authority. So no surprise that these elders here in the book of Revelation, they have thrones, they have crowns. Those are pictures of kingly-like authority. So we shouldn't go, oh, elders are just the nice guys who, make the budget for our church. Now they're nice guys and they do have something to say about the budget. But biblically, we need to see elders as having authority. They are the rulers of a community. In the Old Testament, elders ruled over a city. I think that's my next point here. In the Old Testament, elders were the civil authorities. They just determined life and death matters, right? You bring someone to the elders at the city gate, and they might determine a life or death situation, a capital punishment. So the elders were those people with power. So the picture is in the Old Testament, elders had power over a local city. In the New Testament, elders have power over a local congregation. And so that's that exact same kind of picture there. In the New Testament, elders heads over local congregations with authority. Okay, so this is going with what Mike mentioned, a very important story in the Old Testament where the 70 elders go up with Moses, and in Exodus 24, do you remember what they do with Moses and Aaron on Mount Sinai? What's that? They have a feast, a banquet. They go up there and it kind of just describes God's feet. It describes a kind of a crystal gem platform underneath him. And then they have this meal and they behold God, and God doesn't kill them. Now they don't really see God, but they have this meal in the presence of God. Do you think that might connect here to Revelation at all? Elders in the presence of God? Kind of sounds pretty similar to me. Okay, so in Exodus 24, the 70 elders go up and they have a meal in the presence of God. Where are these elders in Revelation 4? In the presence of God, right? Except the big difference is in Revelation, the elders are there permanently, right? They're constantly before the throne. The 24 elders are there around God's throne 24/7, as we would say. Whereas in Exodus, back in Exodus story with Moses on Mount Sinai, how long were they there with God? An hour or two? Very, very temporarily. So calling these angels elders helps us make the connection back to the 70 elders in the presence of God in Exodus 24. I don't think we'd make that connection if it just said that there's 24 angels with crowns and thrones sitting around the throne of God. If it just said 24 elders on 24 thrones, if it just said 24 angels with crowns and thrones, you'd be like, okay, yeah, because angels are there with God, they're different angels. But by calling them elders, it connects us back to the elders who were in the presence of God in Exodus 24, and then I think it helps us connect the dots of what's going on here. So here's the big question. So why only 24 elders? Why not 70 elders? So I think that helps us go along. Now, Brett, did you have a hand? No. Ryan?
I was going to ask
So Ryan, you're a math guy. What is a number that feels connected to 24 that is a significant Bible number? Okay, there's other math guys over here too. Good, this is good.
12 tribes and there's 12 apostles.
Okay.
Add those two together, you get the number.
I think that's it. Okay, so knowing what we do about numbers in the Bible, we might suspect that 24 represents, and we have 12 and 12. Okay, so we'll hold on to that. And knowing what we know about elders who are rulers and angels who are rulers, so I think there's our connection. What might these 24 elders be about? So I think what we're supposed to see here is these are angelic beings who are over God's people or represent God's people. I don't know the difference, we're not told. But the idea of 24 is connecting the Old Testament 12 and the New Testament 12. Old Testament 12 tribes and the New Testament 12 tribes. And extra credit point for the day, where will we see this very idea later in the book with the 12 and the 12 Old Testament tribes and 12 New Testament, like hand in hand within a couple of verses of each other? It's the very end of the book. In the New Jerusalem, right? So, and we'll go in a second. Since the 70 elders of Exodus 24 were the representatives of all the people of Israel, it makes sense that these 24 elders in Revelation represent all the people of God. So the 24 elders are representing all the people of God, Old Testament and New Testament. And we see this 12 plus 12 symbol later on in Revelation for all of God's people, Old and New. Revelation 21:12, it had a great high wall with 12 gates, and on the gates the names of the 12 tribes were inscribed, and then 2 verses later, and the wall of the city had 12 foundation on them with the 12 names of the 12 apostles. And so the picture of 12 and 12, why did Jesus pick 12 apostles? Is basically this. If you were an Israelite, you had to be descendant from one of the 12 what? Tribes, which were the sons of Jacob, Israel, right? If you are a Christian, you are a spiritual descendant of the gospel message from the 12 what? Apostles and their gospel. So it's the same idea. You're the spiritual heirs, the spiritual children of the apostles, the gospel that Jesus gave to his disciples. So I think that's exactly what's going on here. Ultimately, 12 plus 12 is all of God's people. These are the angels that represent God's people, all of God's people, 24. Now, I'm not going to go into this just to throw that out. Ultimately, I think that kind of communicates this Jew plus Gentile thing that I think connects to the 24 divisions of the priest, the 2 loaves of bread at Pentecost, etc. So we won't go into that, but I do think all that ends up being connected. So what you have around the throne of God are the representation of God's people, and they're worshiping God. And there's 24 of them because that kind of represents all of God's people, Israel of old and Christians all together. And so these angels are worshiping God, right? They're constantly worshiping God. Okay, what else is before the throne? What else do we see and hear around the throne in verses 5 and 6? Lightning, thunder, mine says rumblings, right? So the lightning is visible, the thunder you can hear. What else do you see before the throne? 7 torches, what's that? Heather? Okay, good. And if that sounds familiar, it's because that's exactly what was said back in 1:4. And from the 7 spirits who are before the throne, right? It doesn't say the 7 spirits, which are fires on torches before the throne, but it's pretty much saying that, right? So you got the 7 spirits of God, which are before the throne. You have the 7 torches before the throne of God. And so that's a common Old Testament picture for the Spirit of God is fire. Fire is one of the key, significant, repeated pictures of the Spirit of God. I remember Corey, where's Corey? Corey's there. This was like 2-3 years ago. And she's like, do you think that when Abraham and Isaac are walking up to sacrifice that the torch that Abraham's carrying with his fire represents the Father, Son, and Spirit? I was like, yeah, I like that. Probably does. Yeah, so that idea of the fire, the torch, here, the Spirit of God, even there back in Genesis 22. Okay, so before the throne is a sea of glass. So two different descriptions. It's glass and it's like crystal. And so this seems to just kind of be the platform underneath where God is standing. I already mentioned that something like this is mentioned in Exodus 24 when the 70 elders are eating before God. But look at when the cherubim, they're called living creatures and they're called cherubim. When the living creatures in Ezekiel 1 are like carrying God's chariot, if you were a king in old times, you might have a chariot where you're on wheels and horses are pulling you forward, okay? Or you could be a king, and this to me seems even more showy. You might have slaves that are carrying your little thing, like on their shoulders, right? And they're kind of bouncing around you, the city. And so, well, imagine combining those where on their shoulders are these 4 cherubim, and they're his chariot, and they're literally zooming God around the world, like with the blink of an eye. And the 4 living creatures, and so they're carrying God, and there's the wheel within a wheel there in Ezekiel 1. And so there's the wheels of the chariot, and they're carrying God's throne. But what's the throne on? It describes it like this crystal, like this expanse. So over the living creatures, over Ezekiel's cherubim, there's a likeness of an expanse shining like awe-inspiring crystal spread above their heads. Above the expanse over their heads was the likeness of a throne. So you got this crystal, and on the crystal, like what the throne is sitting on, the platform for the throne is this expanse, is this crystal, is this glass kind of thing. What's the point of that? Why do you think the picture is here and connects to Exodus 24, connects here to Revelation 4? Why do you think God's throne is pictured as seated on an expanse like glass, like crystal? What's that?
He can see all things.
Okay, so you can like look down and like see. I think that's part of it. Keep going with that. Oh,
There's nothing to hide. Transparent.
sure, maybe. Okay, keep going. Where do we tend to think of God? Like up, down, left, right. Where does God live? Up, right? Why can't we look up and see God in heaven? Because there's a sky there, right? There's the sky. Yes, Court? Okay, yeah, calmed waters. Good, yeah. And I think Genesis 1 is relevant here. So here's where I think the idea is. This word for expanse here is literally the word for firmament, expanse in Genesis 1 for the heavens, when God made the firmament. And so God is above the heavens, right? He's seated above the firmament. And I can't look out, at 3 o'clock and see God because there's a sky there. But who's sitting on the skies? God. Whose throne is sitting on this expanse, this firmament? It's God. So do you see why symbolically, when Ezekiel sees the cherubim, like the horses, like the guy carrying the chariot of God and bringing him all around the planet, do you see why symbolically his throne would be seated on something that looks like the skies, the expanse? Because that's what God is seated on. God is seated on the skies, right? He's up there in heaven. And so I think then that does then connect to God can look down and see us all, right? We're laid before him there. Okay, yeah, Joyce.
Well, we not told somewhere, and I'm okay with knowing some of the passages and everything, but aren't we told that we cannot look upon God?
Yeah, absolutely, yes. So there are times in the Old Testament when they were still explaining God in more elementary kinds of ways, where it would describe them seeing God. But by the end of the Bible, we find out they were just seeing angels that were God's representative. It was God's angels, but it was just representative. By the end of the Bible, what we find out is you can't really see God and live until we get to heaven. Yeah. So God tells Moses, I want to see your glory. And God says, if you can't see my face and live, So that kind of idea. So that's probably why when Ezekiel describes God, very little description, right? There's just not a lot. Why? Because he's not really seeing the face of God, because no man can see his face and live. So I think that's a great question. Yeah, John.
I'll have a hearing in here, so I didn't catch all the comments, but this crystal seed be like separation between God and his people? Because in chapter 21, verse 1, the sea is taken away.
Yeah. There's a couple different ways of taking that idea of when the sea's removed. That could be a reference to like the ocean kind of sea. Maybe it's a reference to this, the sea of glass. Because at that point, God is not enthroned on the skies, right? The firmament, the sea of glass. At that point, he's in the New Jerusalem, right? So keep thinking about that. Keep making those connections, and we'll kind of get there eventually. But the basics here that I want us to see is the picture is God is seated on the skies, right? God is seated in the heavens, and that's the symbol. Is he's enthroned above the firmament, above the expanse of the heavens, up there. Was there another hand? Hands, thoughts? Okay. And that just said there, it double-clicked, but it said, look for that. When we get to chapter 15, we'll see the sea of glass again, but there it's mingled with fire. Ooh. So we'll see what's going on when we get to chapter 15, the sea of glass mingled with fire. Yeah, Lawrence.
Well, that's not from today. We do have these times when God appears to people in some manner. Maybe most notably when he comes walking along with two others like Abraham.
Yes.
And or as the angel of the Lord, there's those saying there's two in the bush, right? And God was there and the angel of the Lord was there. So my understanding, and let me correct me, my understanding is that when you see the angel of the Lord, or you see a man-type manifestation of God, that's actually who we would think of as Jesus. That is the way Jesus is the incarnate form of God that he appears in the Old Testament. Of course, he was born into the world in the New Testament.
Yeah, like visible. So there may be something to that, especially with John 12, where it says that Isaiah saw Jesus, basically. Yeah, one like the Son of Man. Yeah, one like the Son of, is that a man? One like the Son of God. Thank you. Yeah, that makes more sense. So, that could be, except the exception to that would be the Ancient of Days in Daniel 7, and the one like the Son of Man's coming to him. So that has to be more of the Father, because the Son of Man is coming. So, I just don't think those are all spelled out for us exactly.
Right. Each one has its own context.
Yeah.
You nailed it there, Daniel. As we're looking at the throne scene here, Daniel is that the Ancient of Days and thrones, plural,
Yeah.
set up. And maybe we're seeing a similar representation of what's here as well. I don't want to sidetrack you.
Sure. Yeah, there's something to that. I think in John 12 would make a case for at least some of that, yeah. Okay, what details do we get of these four living creatures? We have the four living creatures. We just saw that terminology back in Ezekiel 1 to describe the four creatures carrying God's chariot. What details do we get about them here in verses 6 through 8? Different faces. What's that? Lots of eyes. Okay, good. What else? Wings. How many wings? 6 wings.
They seem to be, because I'm reading it from, sitting between God's throne and the 24 thrones.
That may be. So like the 24 is a bigger circle, and the four living creatures seem to kind of be north, south, east, west, on each side of the throne. So lots of eyes. And it says the first one is like a lion, the second one is like a ox, the third one's like a man, the fourth one's like a eagle. Okay, good. And then what are they saying constantly in their worship of God? Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was, who is to come. We've seen that phrase already quite a bit in the book of Revelation. So a lot of this reminds us of different Old Testament scenes. So each one's like a different creature: lion, ox, man, eagle, covered in eyes, 6 wings. They're constantly worshiping God, saying, "Holy, holy, holy." Those are the same words that are said by the seraphim in Isaiah 6, and a similar statement there. But the idea seems to be that in Hebrew, you would magnify an adjective by saying it twice. So you have the holy place, and then you have the holy of holies, right? The most holy. You have the Sabbath on a weekly basis, but then you would have the Sabbath of Sabbaths, like the most critical holy days. And then if you were to talk to someone and you really are trying to grab their attention, I'm talking to you, there's an emotional weight with it, you might say their name twice. So Simon, Simon, Satan is asked to sift you like wheat. Or, I can't think of the other ones now. They say someone's name twice. Well, it happens. They say their name twice. You'll find it. You'll be waking up in the middle of the night and be like, it was that verse where he says his name twice in a row. Martha, Martha. Does he? Does he say twice? Or are we thinking Brady Bunch? No, that's Marsha. That's Marsha. Yeah. So, okay, so the idea is if you are doing that twice, Holy of Holies, Sabbath of Sabbath, well, to say it 3 times, holy, 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 is like pushing the limits of the language. The most holy. The mostest holy, right? Not just holy, 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 holy is the Lord God Almighty. Nothing is holy like God. He alone is holy. And so that's this description of God in heaven. So we'll come back to that. Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? That's one. Good, very good. Yeah, Saul. Okay, so Martha, Martha, Saul, Saul, Simon, Simon, very good. And then when they're worshiping God, they say, they're giving him glory and honor and thanks. Glory and honor and thanks. Maybe 3 different things there. Glory and honor, similar, and then thanks to God. Similar to verse 11, where the 24 elders will say, worthy are you to receive glory and honor and power. So those 3 things there. Okay, so these living creatures, it seems to me they just represent all of creation, right? So man is the pinnacle of creation, the last thing on the last day of creation, who's been given authority and dominion over creation. Okay, the eagle is the pinnacle, the most majestic, if you will, of the flying creatures. The ox, the strongest, the pinnacle of domesticated animals. The lion, the pinnacle of the wild animals, the king of beasts. So kind of representing all of creation here in worship of God. That just makes sense to me. Yeah, right.
Something that just came to me when I was thinking about what the animals might be would be, I know obviously lion, we think of as a powerful animal. I was thinking ox, a sacrifice, just like Jesus. Not that this specifically represents Jesus. There's a lot of, not just imagery, but real oxen slain in the Old Testament and sacrifices in the New. And eagle, we're told, will soar on wings like eagles. Might represent freedom from sin. And I would assume us.
Yeah.
Maybe.
It could be, and there's definitely, these are animals that show up a lot in the Old Testament. So we could make all kinds of connections. Though you set your nest up like the eagles, is what Obadiah told the Edomites. The oxen, the horn of the ox, all of that. So with the 24 elders representing all of God's people, 12 and 12, Old Testament, New Testament, to me that kind of fits then that these creatures then represent kind of all of creation in worship to God. So I want to put this point in here. If you notice the slide background changing slightly, the point of that is as we go through the quarter, I did not want to dump all of the introductory material and all of the explanatory type material in the first 2 classes. Nobody likes that. So I've spread it out a little bit. But I want to use this as an opportunity to jump into some more kind of big picture kind of thing. We're already seeing a principle here of how Revelation uses the Old Testament. Typically, Revelation uses Old Testament images, but it remixes them a little bit. It alters them in some way. So let's just see what we see in the book so far. Jesus has white hair. This is chapter 1. White hair, bronze feet. He wears a robe and a golden sash. What are some different Old Testament pictures we said that draws from? Yes, and well, even specifically the white hair, bronze feet, robe and sash. Those three things. Where did we find those in the Old Testament? Yeah. So the Ancient of Days has white hair, right? And then bronze feet was from Daniel 10. The angel there has bronze feet. And who did we say wore a robe and a gold sash in the Old Testament? The high priest, right. Okay, so God is described with white hair, Ancient of Days. Daniel's angel in Daniel 10 has bronze limbs. The priests wear robes and golden sashes. But all three of those things are coming into Revelation here. Okay, in Revelation chapter 1, we had 7 different golden lampstands with 1 arm each to make a total of 7 lamps. What is that reference, although it's slightly different from the Old Testament? The one lampstand with how many arms? 7 arms. So it's one lampstand with 7 arms for 7 lamps, whereas the other is 7 lampstands with 1 arm each for 7 lamps. And then maybe the best example of this remix principle, so we have the 4 living creatures. One's like a lion, one's like an ox, one's like a man, one's like an eagle. They're full of eyes. Each one has 6 wings. They cry out, holy, holy, holy. Okay, some of this, like we said, shows up in Ezekiel 1, the 4 living creatures. Ezekiel will later call them cherubim. But each of those has 4 faces that face 4 different directions. One has a lion face, one has an ox face, one has a man face, one has an eagle face. So each one of those has 4 faces. So in the 4 people, in the 4 living creatures carrying the chariot there's actually 16 faces. But so you have 1 cherubim, 4 faces. There in Ezekiel 1, the wheels are the ones that are full of eyes. The wheels that are there are full of eyes, not the cherubim. And then where do we see this 6 wings crying out, holy, holy, holy? What's that? Yes, specifically Isaiah 6, and there they are called seraphim. The seraphim have 6 wings. The cherubim only had 4 wings, actually. So seraphim have 6 wings. They cry out, holy, holy, holy. Do you see the point here of the point of remix? Is this a direct holdover from the Old Testament? No, in fact, it's really combining things, including the wheels that were on the eyes that were on the wheels now show up on the 4 living creatures of Revelation. Clearly, Ezekiel's cherubim and Isaiah's seraphim are similar to Revelation's living creatures, but they're not identical. Revelation remixes the Old Testament picture, just like the golden lampstands. Okay? What's the point? The point is as we're studying Revelation, many students of the book basically draw an equal sign when Revelation references something in the Old Testament, and it references that thing, it must be that thing, like an equal sign. So Jesus has got to be the angel in Daniel 10, because they both have bronze limbs, right? Revelation is telling us that Jesus was the angel all along. We know that because that angel is the only angel in the Old Testament with bronze limbs, and Jesus shows up with bronze limbs. Is that how this is working?
First of all, that figure that Daniel's not called an angel.
Oh, yeah, it's just called the man or something? Yeah. Yeah, well, we know it's not like just a man, so, yeah. So that's so, yeah, my point would not be to say that it couldn't be Jesus. And I would say that to say that we know it has to be Jesus because they both have bronze limbs is to misunderstand how Revelation tends to use these figures. So we just see this over and over again. So sometimes Revelation may help us understand the Old Testament reference. I'm fine with that. Revelation may help us understand the Old Testament. Or Revelation could be doing something slightly different with the Old Testament figure. It just depends. but it's not an equal sign. It's not like, oh, if you see it, there's an equal sign there. So here's the remix principle we're going to see through the book. Revelation often alters the Old Testament picture that it's referencing. The living creatures in Revelation 4 are cherubim plus seraphim plus wheels, kind of mixed together. Jesus is the white woolen hair of the Ancient of Days plus the bronze limbs. You get the picture here. The Old Testament reference may help us understand Revelation. Revelation may help us understand the Old Testament, which is what Lawrence is saying. That may help us. But they may not also be talking about the exact same thing. You just kind of have to think about it. So think of this as an invitation to think and to meditate on the Old Testament reference and what's going on in Revelation, instead of seeing it all, the whole book as some uniform code. That's what we need to avoid, is seeing the whole book as some code. Oh, this equals that, which equals that. That's just not how the Bible works. That's not how prophecy works, and that's not how Revelation works. So think about the remix principle as you keep studying. Thank you so much for your participation and attention.